Hi, Dr. Berryessa. Thank you so much for coming to talk about your experience today in the intersection of neuroscience and criminology. Before we get started, I'm Craig McFarland. I am an assistant here hoping to expand different fields in neuroscience and bring experts like yourself to talk about your experience. So we're really honored to have you to talk about your experience with neuroscience and criminology, among many other great things. So before we get started, could you briefly introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I am Colleen Berryessa. I am an assistant professor at the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice in Newark, New Jersey. I live in Brooklyn, so I'm coming in from Brooklyn today. I have been a professor there for 5 years. I'm going into my 6th year in the fall of this year, and I am a criminologist, although I would say that I kind of focus on a bunch of different interdisciplinary disciplines, and I mix psychology and neuroscience, criminology, socio-legal studies, and I mainly study how social contexts and psychological processes and perceptions affect the criminal justice system, particularly as it relates to sentencing, courts, and punishment kind of broadly defined. Wow. And neuroscience is definitely a really major part of that, and we can talk about some of the projects, but I am interested in how people think about neuroscience in kind of criminological spaces and in the legal system, and how that might affect what they think the legal system should do about a person's bad behavior, or how we should punish a person, or how important that information should be in the legal process.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're bridging the gap between like neuroscience and conceptions of the mind with the criminal system. Before we get started about talking about the career that led you to this, like, how have you been able to bridge neuroscience and, let's say, legality?
So yeah, I mean, it's anytime that you have two disciplines that kind of speak to similar things, but obviously speak to them in different ways, with different terminology, they think about behavior in very different ways. It can always be a struggle to kind of get disciplines to talk to each other. But what I have found is that I think that there's a lot of kind of acceptance in the academic community across disciplines now that neuroscience is really important. And so in criminology, that's been something we've definitely been seeing, where we have people who are doing work that is kind of primary scientific research. So people doing brain scans and doing a bunch of kind of primary psychological and neuropsychological work with people who have psychopathy or have brain disorders or things like that, and kind of understanding the roots of criminal behavior. And then you have people on the other side of the spectrum, which is where I lie, which is the area of social science and empirical work, where I'm interested in figuring out what people think about that other type of research. So I'm interested in figuring out, do people, including judges and expert witnesses and attorneys and people who work in the criminal justice system, as well as members of the public, what do they think about that kind of information that other scientists are doing as it relates to understanding the neuroscience of criminal behavior? And do they think that that is kind of relevant to the legal system? And in what way do they think that it should function in the legal system? So it's nice because you have people kind of doing work at a bunch of different areas kind of along that spectrum, but are all kind of within that neurocriminology kind of area.
Yeah, that is beyond fascinating. So to delve deeper into this, could you talk a bit about the career path that led you to doing this work at the intersection?
Sure. So I was really lucky that, I have been really interested in crime since I was as far back as I can remember. I definitely was not, I didn't seek out kind of my interest in criminology and crime. Basically since 2 or 3 years old. It's been my fascination and my obsession. And so I'm really lucky in that regard, because that wasn't something that I chose, it chose me. But one thing that was really helpful is that kind of through my experiences, even in high school and then into college, I really found kind of the area that I was most interested in, and kind of through a variety of experiences that really helped kind of hone in that I was interested in becoming a professor, that I was interested in getting a PhD in criminology, and that I was interested in doing social science research and kind of being that type of professor and academic, as compared to being a neuroscientist or being a law professor. And so I went to Harvard undergrad, which again, there's a lot of Harvard undergrads kind of involved in this whole process, or people who went to Harvard. But that was a really amazing experience for me, because I was kind of at the time really trying to figure out what I was interested in. I was always interested in psychology and neuropsychology and kind of mind, brain, and behavior, and its relationship to criminal behavior and kind of its place in the legal system. but I didn't necessarily know what that looked like when it came to becoming a career. And so initially I thought I wanted to be a lawyer because I think a lot of people who are interested in criminal law or kind of criminal law adjacent things, like was what I do now, lawyer seems to be the thing that, seems familiar, people who are lawyers. And so I kind of came into college thinking that's what I would be. And I didn't really like a lot of the classes that I took. I was a government major. I wasn't that necessarily interested in a lot of the classes I took, but I was, really dead set on wanting to become a lawyer, which I look back now and I'm like, why did you not explore? And why didn't you give yourself some credit and kind of start to take classes and things that were more of interest to you? And so for me, what the two kind of biggest things for me was that I took Steven Pinker's Mind, Brain, and Behavior class when I was a freshman. And even though I won't say that I'm an evolutionary psychologist or necessarily subscribe to a lot of the things maybe that Steven Pinker believes, although I do think that there's obviously a lot of merit in a lot of it. It really opened my eyes to kind of thinking about behavior and its relationship, especially to antisocial behavior in the brain and kind of its place in social norms and the legal system. And that was something I had never really had exposure to. And then I was a mind, brain, and behavior. I did a secondary in that area. And so I took a bunch of classes in that. And so I took a class on the neuropsychology and neuroscience of violence with a professor who was at Harvard Law School at the time. I believe he's since retired. But that also was a class that started to kind of meld the neuroscience and law world together for me and made me realize that I was really interested in the kind of content of that as compared to actually actively using it in kind of a legal forum. And so I did internships and things like that when I was younger. And a lot of them, again, were very legally oriented. And I wasn't that interested in them just because I didn't want to be a lawyer, I realized, but I didn't really necessarily know where to go from there. And I found that for me, I was really interested in kind of the courtroom setting and how people talked about kind of the, idea of why sentencing was occurring or what was the kind of, things that people were using to make these decisions. And that was much more of a social science question and an empirical question as compared to a legal question where I was going to, actively be the person who was arguing a case or potentially writing kind of about doctrinal law or statutes or things like that. And so all of that kind of coalesced to my interest in neuroscience and criminology. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on that. And then I was very lucky to have kind of a variety of experiences before I went to grad school that mixed kind of ethics and law and neuroscience and genetics. I did a pre-doctoral fellowship at Stanford in those areas. And then I, had known a lot about, people in the kind of area that do this work. And so I, was actively looking for an advisor. And I was lucky enough to, talk to Adrian Rain, who is an amazing scholar and a really amazing advisor. And we do very different kind of work, but he was very open to that and was really supportive. And he said, I want you to do whatever you want to do, and I'll support you in whatever way you want to make this happen. And so, going to Penn for my PhD in criminology, I was really able to kind of, again, mix this kind of social science and traditional criminological kind of discipline and perspective with that neuroscience perspective. And Adrian really supported me, even though he is, again, much more of that kind of primary neuroscientist. Overall, it was invaluable experience and wonderful training. And that kind of led me to being a professor now at Rutgers, and I've been there for 5 years.
That is an incredible story. And I love to see like the common thread throughout. So really amazing.
Exactly.
That.
I always like to say is that I've been very blessed, as I mentioned, to be really passionate about crime and kind of psychology of behavior since I was very young. But I wasn't necessarily on a straight track. I kind of wove a little bit, and it was really important for me to try things and especially find out what I didn't like. That was maybe the most important thing for me because, doing internships at different places when I was in college, a lot of courtrooms, a lot of kind of federal agencies and stuff. All of those taught me that I didn't really like the work that much. It wasn't that it wasn't valuable. It was actually more valuable that I found out that I wasn't that interested in it by having that experience than actually doing something that I was interested in. And in college, I think that that's really important for people because you come in thinking you know what you want to do, and you actually don't necessarily know not because you don't think it's just that you haven't had exposure and time to explore, and you take one class and it changes your life.
Yeah. Well, now that you are on the other end of this process, you've been through this, For students and others watching this, what advice would you give them about pursuing a career in neurocriminology?
It's a really good question. So I would say the main thing, especially kind of early on in your career, is kind of what I was just mentioning, exploring, taking classes that seem interesting to you, not limiting yourself to taking things that you think you should be taking because you came in thinking you wanted to be a doctor or thinking you wanted to be a banker. And college is the best time to explore. And so taking classes, actively seeking out professors and advisement. If you can't find it in your own school, email people. Like I definitely get emails even now from people from different universities who are undergraduates and graduates and are asking for experience, like wanting to figure out, I'm interested in this. Where do I get this? Do you have any, experience that I can do as a research assistant or any research I can help with? The worst thing that can happen is someone says no. So if you find someone that you think has really cool work, send them an email. We love to hear from students and hear how excited you are. And so emailing, exploring, chatting, trying to get advice. You're not expected to know what you're doing. A lot of us still don't know what we're doing fully at any given moment. And so, really asking for help and just trying to figure out kind of what you're interested in and allowing yourself that time to explore. The other thing is that if you become interested in something later on, even after you've graduated from college, it doesn't mean that you can't do what you were interested in now. Like if you want, people become doctors who were art history majors, like people find out what they're interested in very, very different stages. And sometimes that's very early and sometimes that's a little bit later. But do not count it out. If it's something you're passionate with and you want to do it in the long term, it is worth it to take the time to be able to do it. And I know especially people in my experience being at Harvard and at a lot of colleges, you feel a lot of pressure to know what you're doing very early on, but that life is so long that you want to make sure that you give yourself the ability to do it. And just seek things out, follow what you're interested in. And, people are really wanting to help. And so if somebody's research interests you, if you think you might want to be a professor, if you want to talk to somebody, just email somebody who you think might be helpful. The worst thing that can happen is they don't respond. And in most cases, people are going to respond and they're going to want to be helpful.
Well, thank you for that advice. And also thank you so much for your words.